love gets there first. Love comes to understand who God is and how we fit with this God. And so again here, the disciples should have had some clear idea. This had happened to Peter once before. He had gone out fishing in the boat, I don't think I'm going to catch anything, Lord. And he swamps his boats with fish. And even then, Peter didn't get it. But John did. And then he told Peter. And love sees first. Love comes first. And then Peter got it and swam ashore. Now, again, it's interesting to take a look at this gospel. Last week, the gospel actually ended. If you remember, at the very end of it, he said these were the appearances that Jesus made to his apostles after his resurrection. And the next thing you know, we got another week where he's doing the same thing. It's kind of an addendum, just like the addendum that was put on at Mark's gospel at the very end. See, Mark had no story of resurrection. Mark just had Jesus die and was buried, and that was it. But there's another part that has been added later on as part of his gospel to give us some of the resurrection stories of Jesus. Here, the same thing. John's gospel, for some reason, didn't have this in, and they felt it was necessary. And one of the reasons that they felt it was necessary is because Peter was the leader of this group. And Peter needed to be seen by his disciples as having that leadership role even after he had denied Jesus. Okay, so that's why I think this whole thing had to happen, why they finally added it on. The meal itself is a very clear example of Eucharist. We are all invited. We're all invited to eat and to break bread with our God, with Jesus. He's there all the time for us. He calls them to do this, and he will send them forth to be ministers of Eucharist, ministers of thanksgiving for the gifts that they had received through Jesus. Now, as we look at the number of fish is really not important. There's been dozens and dozens of secret codes that people have thought up for the reason why it's 153 fish. What satisfied me most was that John loves to exaggerate. When Jesus made wine at Cana, it was 180 gallons. No, it wasn't, It was a lot of wine, but 180 is a little bit much, And then when Jesus dies and they bring spices, 100 pounds of spices for his body. Well, when one might have been enough. John tends to exaggerate a lot. 153 fish, there's a lot of fish there, okay? I get the idea. But he's going to name a huge number for them so that we know this is an incredible event that's happening. Something special is happening beyond your imagining, more than you can think of, more certainly than you might want. So this 153 fish is something you should not get distracted about. But this is the part of the gospel that I really like. Peter does need to draw closer to Jesus. He knows he's been forgiven. The community has taken him back. Jesus himself has spoken to him in the upper room and assured him of forgiveness. But for that leadership role, I think more was needed. And so he calls him over. And I don't know, maybe 10 feet. And he starts questioning him, do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? And every time I read that passage, I have to ask myself, and so I'll ask you, have you ever felt that God asks you that? Do you love me? Have you ever felt that God is asking you that question? Do you love me? I think he asks it of us every day, many, many times a day. Do you love me? And if we hear that question, if we hear that voice, then do we really answer? Or are we too busy? Are we too busy to hear it? Or having slowed enough to hear, are we too busy, too distracted to say, yes, Lord, I love you? And to make that your prayer for the day. Yes, Lord, I love you. So what's happening here is God, Jesus, is taking Peter and he's shaping him as a leader, okay? And so he's forgiven him. He's talked to him about the power and necessity of love. And then he says, feed my sheep, feed my lambs, tend my sheep. Take care of the powerless people in this world. Now, probably the reason I arrived at my homily today is because I so much admire our present Pope. And I think what he is manifesting is the Johannine picture of what Peter's leadership could be like or should be like. And to compare it with something, I'll take you back to Matthew chapter 16, verse 16, something like that. And that's the one we all remember. We've heard it 1,000 times. I think they started off every school year with it, And Peter, you are the rock. Now, that begins to describe in Matthew's idea what the leader of the church should be like. A rock should be stable, solid. And the gates of hell shall not prevail against you. You're defensively set. Nobody can conquer you. You are unmovable, okay? That same rock type of thing. Defensive stance. And then finally, he says, I give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven. Whose sins you shall forgive, they are forgiven. The keys are a powerful symbol of power. The keys show power. I can open that gate or not. I can take people to the heavens, or I can say no. So you look at what comes out of Matthew 16 is the church, or Peter, is to be a person of great solidity, defensive ability, and one who has power. But then you have John talking to us today. And I think this is the one that our present Pope listens to more than Matthew. He says, you have to be a lover. You have to love people. You have to forgive people. And you have to take care of the powerless. Now, last I checked, nobody had been overrun by a lamb recently, Oh, a lamb came in and beat me up, That hasn't happened. They're pretty much powerless animals, right? And you watch some of the videos on TV and you see a little kid, 3 years old, being mowed down by a sheep. Well, that's about the extent of what sheep can do, The sheep and lambs, they've got no protection. They're vulnerable. They've got nothing. And he uses that expression of sheep and lambs because he too became the lamb. He too became defenseless and allowed us to do to him what we did to him. Because it was the human race that did it. Defenseless. I am the lamb. And we are charged to take care of the lambs, take care of the sheep. They need our protection. If they're hungry, we need feed them. If they're broken, we need mend them. If they're unhappy, we should bring them joy. We should not sit in judgment as to why they are poor or broken or hungry. But we do. We question. And I do it, There's always people knocking on the door. But I've gotten a lot better. If somebody needs something, I give it to them. And if that thought starts to cross my mind, I mentally slap myself. You can't do that. You can't go there. You take care of people who are in need. So I really believe that we're presented here with two different visions of the papacy, of leadership, of how it should be. And I think there's probably a mix of both these that needs to happen. We've discussed a long time ago the 4 different images of God that are present in the scriptures. God out there, up there, holy. God down here, shaping and forming the human race, who recognizes our sinfulness. God who is perfect. God who is law. We've got all these images portrayed for us in the scriptures about who God is. I can find them for you. And lots of people pick one or the other. You don't have to pick just one. I've picked a couple. I picked the priestly one and the Yahwistic one. The Yahwistic one is the one who deals best with sinners. So we have to pick an image and put them together, not hold them separate. Separate is sinful. So we need to merge these two images of leadership in our church. And you and I in our own minds need to do the same thing as we try to imitate Christ in this world.